following Jesus was crucial every step of the way. And the one thing we agreed on in the beginning of marriage is we would do anything the Lord said, so long as it wasn't being missionaries. So we were all in for anything except missionary work until one Sunday.
One of the things that was really clear in God's call was that instability, or even I would say more specifically insecurity that we felt, was we weren't fully stepping into what the Lord had for us. And so there was like this holy discontent. And in that, it was like when the call came, it was energy and excitement and vision and all of those things came with it. It wasn't like, okay, that's crazy. Now what, Lord? It was more like, okay, I'm going to start moving. I'm going to start moving in that direction.
Welcome to Called Beyond, a Novo mission podcast. We love sharing stories about how we can hear God speaking to us, as well as what happens when we say yes to His calling in our lives. During this second season of the podcast, we're highlighting 3 spiritual rhythms reflected in the life of Christ. Cave, the place of encounter with God's word and presence. Table, the place of belonging with supportive family and friends. And road, the place of spiritual engagement in the world. Well, welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of the Called Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Tim Shuck. Today, I'm joined by 2 amazing Novo missionaries, Stu and Sara Sutherland, who are with us from Northern California. Together, they run nonprofit coffee houses as a vehicle for connecting with people who are far from God. And they happen to live in the 5th most unchurched city in the U.S. So all of you Googlers out there, I'm sure you're trying to figure out where that is. But it's not exactly the most exciting statistic, but it has everything to do with the need for them being where they are. And we want to tell the stories about people coming closer and closer to God. So will you guys join me in welcoming Stu and Sara to the call? Welcome, you guys.
Thanks. Hey,
Tim, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Well, man, I've gotten to know these guys just a little bit through the last couple of years, and I'm excited for you guys to get to hear some of their story as we unpack what does it look like for them to be called beyond? Like, what's it look like to say yes to Jesus? And so I think maybe the first question, maybe for Sara, because I want the honest truth from you, like, what has this like following Jesus, being married to this guy, Stu, been like? How did you guys get, I guess, connected and on this journey of living missionally together?
So, I mean, our story is crazy. We started super young, had babies, our first baby before we were married. And so it was just like following Jesus was crucial every step of the way. And I realized after time that I'm also apostolic, but I definitely married an apostolic dude who's just, he has a heart for God. And he's like, whatever the Lord says, that's what we're going to do. The one thing we agreed on in the beginning of marriage is we would do anything the Lord said, so long as it wasn't being missionaries. So we were all in for anything except missionary work until
I love it.
until one Sunday. And it was just like, I mean, there were things building up to it. And then the Lord was like, nailed Stu with a call to overseas missions. And, you know, Stu was unpacking that to me later that afternoon.
And Sara, by the way, already knew.
I was like, yeah, I know, but that's what we're doing.
Wow.
Yeah. And then kind of over the journey of becoming missionaries, thinking we were going overseas, the Lord really kindly redirected us to our backyard. But I think that initial overseas call helped us solidify in our minds that we were missionaries, that we weren't church planters. And it's really different to be a missionary than to be a church planter.
That's amazing. Okay, so I love this story already because I feel like I've lived this story a little bit. Like, I'm okay with anything except for this. And like, it's almost like by saying this, it's like that becomes the thing.
Right.
And so I find that amazing. That's so scriptural, right? It's just sort of like Jesus very gently meets us in our longing. And he actually knows what's best for us, and he wants to qualify us out of the areas where we maybe don't feel qualified, or maybe it feels too big or too crazy or too stressful. Stu, what did that feel like to receive this, like, I would say, calling that was wanted to be a no, but it needed to be a yes?
Ooh, I think like Sarah said, there were a lot of events leading up to that. One of the events was we did a short-term missions trip. The missionaries pulled us aside, said, you guys have everything it takes to be missionaries. But then they're like, don't go unless God calls you. We were so relieved to hear that last sentence because we're like, God did not call us. We're good. So I think that was kind of the cliffhanger. And when it was on a Sunday, I was on the worship team. I was getting ready to play bass, and then I felt really sick. And I was like, this is weird. Ended up going home. I'm on the couch. Sarah's next to me. I just lose it. I'm crying, whatever. I can't figure out what internally is wrong with me. And that's when it's like the clouds parted, and it was like, oh no, God's calling us. It was clear. And it was like, wow. I had to say yes. I had no choice. It was so powerful. And so it really, I think the Lord was gentle in wooing us through that process. But when the call came, it was crystal clear.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, congratulations on saying yes. Because I feel like, there's so many opportunities we have to ignore. And you probably would say this, like, I know that I could have said no. But I knew that I had to say yes. It's kind of that, like, it is a moment of clarity in reality where it's very clear, but you also know that you had a decision to make as well. I really love that. I'm just curious, how far into like y'all's relationship did you feel this cementing call to become missionaries and move in this direction?
We were in Paraguay 5 years after, like, our 5th anniversary. So I think it was we'd been married for about 8 years, and homeschooling our kids. Stu's working in architecture. He had just finished college, graduated. Like I said, we were babies when we got married. So we were pretty young, but had been together for a little while.
Yeah. Well, I find that's exciting. So it's just like, essentially what you're describing is like everybody's chaos. Everybody's sort of normal, chaotic life, kind of within Christendom, a short-term mission trip here, and life and work and babies and homeschooling and mortgages or rent to pay, or, all of the chaos of life. And you guys are sifting through these kind of big what feel like big life-altering decisions amidst just the normalcy, which is often chaotic, of life.
Yeah, 100%.
For sure. And I kind of think, in the upheaval of it all, we were homeowners at that point, and, raising our kids and looking for some semblance of normalcy. I remember kind of in that season hanging out with some friends going, man, I just want to have some friends that don't move away after, 18 months, just looking for something. But I think what was beautiful in the Lord's call in that time of our lives, and Tim, I think you're digging this up, which is a really good point. It's that we were already in motion. There wasn't a lot that our lives already felt kind of nomadic, even though we longed for something more stable. But I think one of the things that was really clear in God's call was that instability, or even I would say more specifically insecurity that we felt, was we weren't fully stepping into what the Lord had for us. And so there was like this holy discontent. And in that, it was like when the call came, it was energy and excitement and, vision and all of those things came with it. It wasn't like, okay, that's crazy. Now what, Lord? It was more like, okay, I'm going to start moving. I'm going to start moving in that direction. And because we weren't stuck in a place of comfort and regularity, I don't know. It just, again, it's part of God's beautiful design when He invites us into things. Yeah. The timing was right.
Yeah, and it's so amazing because, something that Sarah said when she was just talking about how God has wired the both of you together, and you use the word apostolic just to kind of define that term in case that feels like an outlier for anyone listening to this, is I like to think of that as being like almost like a spiritual entrepreneur, like someone who takes risks, who is maybe a fire starter, or someone who's like looking for ways to engage and create something that's never been there before, with the heart of seeing spirit-filled experiences come out of it. And so that idea of being apostolic, I mean, it really matches with what you're saying right now. It's like once we had the yes to get out of the way, it's like the excitement and the building and the vision for what could happen next started to come to you guys. Does that feel fair to say it that way?
Yeah,
for sure.
And it really took key leaders in our lives to unlock or even give us permission to operate in that apostolic wiring and calling. I would say I grew up being told that I was interested in too many things at once, pick a thing, but I was always learning, I was always building, I was always creating. And, even culturally or in your family, you could be unusual, and people would people would tell me you need to focus. For me, that was the pursuit. That was the joy. It was the new thing. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And so when I had a leader call that out, it's like, no, that's apostolic. That's the entrepreneur for the kingdom. Things started to make sense. But again, without those key people to give us language and permission and even being able to identify what it's unto, I don't know that we would have been able to fully embrace what that call meant.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. This whole idea of creating these nonprofit coffee houses, like as places where people can engage. I find it so beautiful as we're unpacking this, like, entrepreneur for the kingdom, in this idea of knowing where this is kind of going. Will you kind of bring us into this story a little bit as far as like, how did the boxes start to align for you to move into what you're actually doing even today?
I mean, I think a lot of it was connecting with leaders, people that was part of our journey. We were with the Christian and Missionary Alliance, and in that got, had other schooling we needed to do, other education, which led to connection with the Randalls, who are actually now Novo missionaries. And it was in that relationship with them that the Lord used them to reshape our heart and vision for overseas missions, where we thought we would be doing like a coffee house community center type thing, because we're living room people, we're not stage people. So we knew that would always be like our trajectory. But God used, other people to speak into our lives and then help reshape our focus from overseas to local.
Yeah. So like Sarah was sharing, we really thought we were going to go overseas to France and work with postmodern, post-church culture. We knew small groups and discipleship was our jam. And we love coffee. I've been in coffee. It was my first job when I was 13, and just was always experimenting with it. As we became, as the Lord put that call on us, coffee was there, small groups and discipleship was there, and we thought France, but as we were in relationship with the local church, and that was with Bill and Jill Randall, who were those leaders, by the way, that called out the apostolic in us. And it was that life-on-life relationship time. It was the Lord moving, where Risen King, the local church in Redding, was really investing in a small community about 11 minutes north called City of Shasta Lake. They had vision. They knew God wanted to move in that city, but they didn't have leadership. And when we came into the scene, it became really clear that the Lord was inviting us to think like missionaries, to live like missionaries, to be missionaries, but to do that locally, to do that in the City of Shasta Lake.
Wow.
And it came with that vision of coffee. It came with that vision of small groups and discipleship, because we saw a community that was post-modern, post-church, just like we thought we were going to be in France. And so it was this perfect alignment with what we knew about us and what we knew about our call. It was just where was unclear. And so Shasta Lake ended up being that thing. We walked the streets, we prayer walked the streets of Shasta Lake. We did video interviews with locals who had led us. We created this whole montage and shared it with the church community that we were part of to build vision. And with that came funding. With that came the business plan. Again, we didn't want to be missionaries, and we sure as heck didn't want to be business owners or entrepreneurs. Like, these were all things that were so outside of our vision that we had for ourselves, that I had for myself. Like that, if you were to ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would always say, well, I just want to do what Jesus wants me to do. But underlying in that expectation would probably be something like, I don't know, probably probably nothing too great. I mean, growing up looking at missionaries, they were like, oh, like these amazing people that were so otherworldly that you could never be like one. And so it just felt really out of reach. But again, the simple obedience step by step as the Lord wooed us and led us. He led us to a place. He led us with, the vision of small groups and discipleship and all the things. And then he led us with provision to buy a building and to build these businesses that ultimately has now allowed us to build teams that are groups of people who are everyday missionaries engaging our city of Shasta Lake and now the city of Redding.
I would be remiss if I didn't at least ask you guys, I'm going to use kind of a metaphor because I just love them, and just invite you into this metaphor and just a chance to describe kind of what you guys see as you kind of reflect on it. So let's just assume the Lord is painting a masterpiece through the brushes of Stu and Sara, and he's been working on it for decades, and he's been writing it or drawing it for a really long time. And you've gotten to see only some of the beautiful things that he's doing through your guys' obedience and your yes to him. If you kind of zoom out of your own story and look back at what he's doing, what are the things that you feel like he's highlighting as like his wonderful works of art that only he could do? And I get that this is kind of an elaborate question and maybe a little bit out there, but like, as you look at the things, what are the things that you're seeing actually bring you guys the most joy, where you know that only by partnering with God does this happen, and you get to actually be a part of it, and you're part of this painting that he's making?
Well, let me tell you a story about that. We had a guy on our team. He was amazing. He was 1,000% in everything that he did. He was the biggest personality. Everybody loved him. He was this amazing networker. We still love this guy, but it turned out that something more interesting caught his eye. And so he had a long conversation with us and said, I know I committed to being on the team, but something else came up. I'm going to go do that. And we said, okay. And had a little bit of a conversation, but it didn't go too deep. So we blessed him, released him, and he went and did the thing that he was really excited about. Well, fast forward about a year and a half or so, he comes back to us after working in this other field that was really difficult, found out that working for us wasn't as hard as he thought or bad as he thought. I don't know, but realized I want to still invest time here. I feel like there's more for me to learn and more for me to do. And we're like, yeah, we would love that too. We've got this leadership opening, but we always invite our people into a 1-year commitment. And part of that is it takes us a year to properly what we call ruin you and give you the DNA, give you the stuff that we know that helps you live sustainable rhythms of being a disciple who makes disciples. And so he's like, yeah, I'm all in for that again, because this is Mr. 1,000%. So he was all in, gung-ho, super excited. And just a few months in, we had the talk again. And he's like, yeah, turns out I can't really do this, and it's not working out for me, and it's not what I expected. And I said, hey, we had a commitment. Well, I thought we were doing this. He's like, no, I can't. And I said, well, can we pull back? He's like, I'm all in or I'm all out, and I'm going to be all out. I'm like, oh, okay. And that conversation ended, but things in me were not good. Like, and it wasn't frustration or anger. It was like, man, this feels weird. This feels off. And so I called him up and said, hey, this is not settling well with me. Are you okay if we meet up again and talk? And he said, yeah, I'd love to. And we have a great relationship. And so we were able to sit down, have a beer, and have a conversation around some patterns. And I said, this isn't about me, but I just wanted to make an observation of what I'm experiencing with you. And it seems like there's this cycle that you're going through over and over again. I've seen it 2 or 3 times with you. And he's like, yeah, people have been saying that to me most of my life. And so I stopped and said, well, what are you doing about it? He's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, does this feel like maybe a family pattern? Where do you see this happen with your folks or anything like that? And he's like, well, yeah, actually, this happened with my parents, my grandparents. I'm like, hey, have you ever thought about this being like a family sin pattern or, something that maybe we need to break off in the spirit? Wow. And maybe this is impacting how you live your life right now. He's like, oh, I haven't really thought about that. And so it was amazing. We had a chance just to hang out with Jesus and go after that, and to break off that cycle that was really something learned in how he grew up, but also probably something very spiritual bound up in his family and in his family of origin. And at the end of it, he's crying and he's just like, I didn't realize this was in my way. And so we've been kind of keeping up with him. But I would say, to answer your question, like, that's the stuff, that's the stuff when we just do the daily grind with people and we have the hard breakup conversations, or oftentimes we get to be the bad guys, not really, but in their perspective, kind of a hard person in their life, because we're authentic. Yeah. We're not mean, but we're just true, and we're not going to sweep things under the carpet. We do conflict well because we believe that it's for healing. And, I think those are the things that God continues to work out in the opportunities and the time that we get to have with people. It's formational. It's your moment with us is a moment, but we are also in faith trusting that God's multiplying that he's taking that as a milestone in somebody's story.
Wow. I love it, and I love the idea that, stories really are the brushstrokes of what God is doing in painting. And so I love that you went straight to story, out of that question, because it really is. I mean, that really is what God paints with. Is it's testimony after testimony. It's glory. It's the opportunities we have to say, God's way works, and he's so ever present in our lives and in here right now. And we can do this together, and I'm with you. And I love this idea of being authentic truth to people. Truth leads to healing. Isn't that amazing? What a cool, seems like a revolutionary concept, and it's something our world needs, and so as we kind of wrap up this episode, one of my favorite things of this season is getting to ask guests, what's one thing that a listener could try, that you've seen be really effective, maybe in your own life. It could be something you're just started, or it could be something you've done for a long time, but just something to lead them with, whether it's a personal prayer pursuit or a fun question to ask while you're gathering with your friends, or even a way to engage someone that's right across from you that you don't know, that maybe needs to experience the love of God, And so I'm setting that before you guys just to ask you, is there something that you would leave for the listeners? Just something to try, something to take a small risk, just try this out and see if there's fruit there for you.
Mm-hmm. Something that I have recently learned and am enjoying practicing. It's something I read in the book, Living Like Monks, Praying Like Fools. I can't remember the author, but he talks about
Tyler Stanton, I believe. Practicing
gratitude and just and piling gratitude on top of gratitude. So it's like, oh Lord, thank you for this food, but not just thank you for this food, but thank you that, I got to buy these tomatoes from the farmer's market, and thank you so much for those farmers and what a gift they are to me and in my life. And thank you that I get to share it with these friends, and thank you, for the depth of relationship that I have with these friends that I get to share this food with, and, just kind of building on the simple little thing that's right in front of us, and just layering gratitude. It for me has really, I tend to be optimistic, but I also tend to be really critical. And so practicing, especially layering gratitude, has been really helpful for me in recognizing just the goodness of God, especially when I'm struggling.
Wow, that's great. Stu, what is it for you?
Being apostolic, and if you guys are in Enneagram 8, wing 9. So challenger with some peacemaker. That's the excuse for this one. You ready? What's the Lord saying to you, and what are you doing about it? The small, simple obediences. God's a high invitation. He invites us into big things, but he's also a high challenge. He invites us to orient ourselves to him and nowhere else. And so again, when we have our eyes fixed on him, when we're abiding in him, and we make space to hear his voice, he invites us to partner with him in his plan for redemption. So what's he saying to you? What are you doing about it?
Well, guys, thanks so much for gathering around the table here just to talk about what we learned from Stu and Sara's story. Man, so many good takeaways. Some of the things that I heard that really pulled out, especially when thinking about kind of our organizing principle for this season, being cave, table, and road, you can really see how those practices or areas have influenced their life. I think of that amazing sort of meeting with the Randalls where they were kind of really discipled, really sort of able to be fully open and honest. And around that table, they kind of came to some amount of unity and then moved out from that kind of into the road, which is kind of where they're living their life now. And so I hope that hearing that thing blessed you. There was a number of other things that came up in the episode too. One of the things I love is just this idea of what being a disciple really looks like, what being a follower of Jesus really looks like, what doing as Jesus did and said, like following him, like what that actually looks like practically for each of us. It's taking time to listen. It's spending time. It's managing conflict well, because you know that healing comes as a result of doing that well. And it's all of these little bits and pieces that there's an invitation for each of us to move into being a disciple, not just for the benefit of others, but also for the benefit of ourselves too, in being who Jesus is calling into us, as we're all kind of works in progress a little bit, as we all need to be following and yoked and abiding with him. And so I hope that that caught you up as well, as you see multiple times in most where they are actually discipling other people as well. They are being disciples to other people in their story, and God is using that to paint this beautiful picture in the Mount Shasta area of Northern California through just two humble, obedient servants named Sara and Stu, and for the multiple others that are coming out of that as well. I hope that today's episode was a blessing to you, and I just want to challenge you to try those two things. Try just gratitude layering, just following that thing that you're grateful for all the way back to its origin, as well as answering that question, what is God telling you and what are you doing about it? So bless you guys today as you listen. So as we wrap up this episode, we want you to know that you too are called beyond. We believe there is more that God desires for your life than you could possibly ask or imagine. Are you eager to cultivate a healthy, fruitful, and holistic walk with God? We bless you in Jesus' name to experience spiritually rich times in the cave, around the table, and on the road. We pray and believe for transformation in your personal relationship with Jesus, your community with other believers, and in the missional spaces the Spirit of God is inviting you into.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Called Beyond is a production of Novo Mission, Inc. To learn more about Novo's commitment to multiply movements of the gospel and mobilize the church for that mission, we invite you to check us out on our website at novo.org or follow us at Novo Mission on Facebook or Instagram. The music in today's episode was written by the band Wild Earth and used with permission from the artist. Thank you again for giving our podcast a listen. We hope you'll join us for more Called Beyond.